It was late October when I made the decision to take a detour through the small town of Coal Ridge. The air had that crisp autumn bite to it, the kind that reminds you that winter is just around the corner. I'd been driving for hours, the hum of my car and the occasional rustling of leaves my only companions. There was no reason to stop, no reason to be there, except curiosity. I remember the moment I first saw the sign. Welcome to Coal Ridge. Small, faded like the town itself. But there was something unsettling about the way the letters seemed to tremble in the wind. I should have kept driving. I should have ignored that gut feeling that something wasn't right. But I didn't. The road was empty. I didn't pass a single car, nor did I hear any distant voices or laughter. It was as if the world had forgotten this place even existed. I parked in front of a diner, the only building that seemed to still be alive in that town. The light inside was dim, and the scent of burnt coffee wafted through the air, inviting me in. I thought I'd grab something warm and continue on, but when I stepped inside, I realized it wasn't the warmth of the diner that was unsettling. It was the silence. No chatter, no clinking of dishes, just the hum of the refrigerator in the corner. An elderly woman behind the counter looked up when I walked in. Her eyes were pale, almost too pale, like they hadn't seen sunlight in years. "You're not from around here," she said, her voice low and raspy. I hesitated. "No, just passing through. Coal Ridge doesn't get many passers-by," she muttered, almost to herself. "And not many leave." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I didn't want to hear any more, but I had to know. What was so strange about this town? I sat at the counter and ordered coffee, trying to ignore the creeping sense that something was terribly wrong. It wasn't until I noticed the newspaper clippings pinned to the wall behind the counter that I started feeling the weight of unease pressing down on me. The pictures were old, the edges curled and yellowed. Some showed the same people year after year, their faces aging but always present in the town's events. Others were headlines about strange disappearances and unsolved murders. "Been a long time since anyone from out of town came here," the woman continued, wiping down the counter. "You'd best be careful. People disappear around these parts. People you wouldn't think are worth noticing." I stared at her, trying to make sense of her cryptic words. Disappear? The woman's eyes flickered for a second, like she had seen something, or someone, behind me. She didn't answer, but the way she stood there, frozen, told me more than any words could. The door to the diner creaked open. A tall man, his face obscured by the brim of a worn-out hat, stepped inside. He didn't speak a word to me, but I felt his presence as if it filled the entire room. His boots scraped across the floor, heavy and deliberate. Without even looking at me, he sat at the farthest corner booth and folded his hands in front of him. The woman behind the counter gave him a nod, her lips pressing into a thin line. She didn't say anything else to me either, and for the first time, I felt the full weight of the silence around me. I should have left then, but something about the town, about the people, held me there. I finished my coffee, paid the woman, and stepped outside into the cold night air. The streets were eerily quiet, save for the occasional gust of wind that rattled the windows of the buildings around me. As I started my car, I caught a glimpse of the man from the diner in my rearview mirror. He was standing in the doorway, watching me. I didn't know it yet, but I was already in too deep, and Coal Ridge would not let me leave so easily. I didn't sleep that night. Something about the drive through Coal Ridge had unsettled me more than I was willing to admit. The town seemed to linger in the back of my mind, a persistent thought I couldn't shake off. I found myself glancing at the rearview mirror more than usual, half expecting to see that man from the diner lurking in the darkness behind me. The road stretched out ahead like an endless ribbon, but the further I went, the less it felt like I was actually leaving Coal Ridge behind. It was like the town was following me, creeping at the edges of my vision. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself it was all in my head. But that eerie sensation of being watched, of being hunted, gnawed at me. I pulled over on a desolate stretch of highway. The headlights of my car cut through the fog that had rolled in, casting long shadows across the empty road. I had to clear my mind, to get away from the nagging dread that had settled over me. That was when I noticed it. Something in the distance, barely visible through the thickening fog. At first, I thought it was just another tree, but as I looked closer, I realized it was a figure standing by the side of the road. A man. The same man I'd seen in the diner. He was standing perfectly still, just outside the reach of my headlights, his face hidden beneath the brim of his hat. There was no way he had followed me this far. No way he could have appeared out of nowhere like that. I didn't know what made me do it, but I rolled down my window. A chill swept in, the kind that cuts straight through your bones. The man didn't move. He just stood there, silent as a tomb. "Hey!" I called out, my voice trembling. "Are you okay?" He didn't answer. The only sound that came from him was the slow, deliberate scrape of his boots against the gravel. Something about that sound was so unnatural, like it was too measured, too deliberate. I should have driven off, but I couldn't move. My foot hovered over the accelerator, my entire body frozen with the strange sense that I was meant to do something. Something that I didn't understand. Without warning, the man stepped forward. His face, finally visible under the faint light of the car, sent a jolt of fear straight through me. His eyes weren't just empty. They were wrong, hollow, as if someone had taken the life from him, leaving only a shell of a man behind. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice rough, as if it hadn't been used in years. "You don't belong in Coal Ridge." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin. There was something deeply unsettling about the way he spoke. It wasn't a warning. It was a fact. "I'm just passing through," I stammered, my heart pounding in my chest. "I'll leave. I don't want any trouble." The man's lips twisted into a thin, almost mocking smile. He took a slow step closer, his movements unnervingly fluid, like a predator closing in on its prey. "You don't leave once Coal Ridge claims you," he said. "You become part of it, whether you want to or not." I backed up, my hands shaking as I reached for the gear shift. My car engine roared to life as I slammed my foot on the pedal, tearing down the road. The man didn't chase me. He didn't need to. His presence, his words, followed me like a shadow I couldn't outrun. I didn't stop until I was miles away from Coal Ridge. I pulled off onto another highway, gasping for breath. The world outside my car was quiet, peaceful even. But I knew the man's words had been true. Coal Ridge didn't let go so easily. And something, or someone, was waiting for me there. It's funny how fear works. You'd think after what happened, I'd do everything I could to stay away from Coal Ridge. But the more I tried to put it behind me, the more the town seemed to pull me back. It's been weeks since that night. I haven't been able to sleep properly, and no matter where I go, that man's face, those hollow eyes, haunt me. I keep telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks, that the town's strange energy had gotten to me. But I know deep down it wasn't just my mind. It was real. I tried to move on. I tried to put the whole thing out of my head. But then it happened. I saw the name again. Coal Ridge. It was in a news article. First, I didn't think much of it. Small towns have their share of oddities. But the more I read, the more my heart sank. The headline said, "Another disappearance in Coal Ridge." Beneath it, there was a description of a woman who had been reported missing, last seen driving through the area. There was no sign of a struggle, no clues, just an empty car parked near the same diner I had visited. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to go back. I had to find out what was really happening in that town. I thought maybe I could get answers. I thought I could walk into the diner, confront that woman, and ask her about the man. What did he mean when he said, "You become part of it"? I had to know. So, against my better judgment, I made the decision. I drove back to Coal Ridge. When I arrived, the town was just as I remembered, silent, abandoned, with only a handful of dim streetlights casting long shadows across the empty streets. The diner was still there, though it looked even more run down now. A rusted sign hung crookedly above the door. The same strange unease settled over me as I parked in front of it. I took a deep breath, bracing myself, and walked inside. The bell above the door jingled faintly, but the silence inside was even more oppressive than I remembered. It wasn't the emptiness that scared me this time. It was the feeling that I wasn't alone. It was as if the very air had a presence in it. Something watching, something waiting. The woman behind the counter was gone. Instead, a man stood there, tall and thin, with the same dead look in his eyes. He was wiping down the counter with a rag, his movements slow and methodical. His face was as expressionless as the man I had seen on the highway, but his presence felt different, stronger somehow. I approached the counter, my voice barely a whisper. I'm looking for answers. I need to know what's happening here. The man didn't look up. He just kept wiping the counter, his hands moving in slow circles, never acknowledging me. I waited. Seconds dragged into minutes. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and cold. "You shouldn't have come back." My stomach twisted in knots. Why? What's going on in this town? What happened to the people who disappear? He looked at me then. His eyes were empty, just like the others. But there was something else there. Something ancient. Something that spoke of a dark truth buried deep in this place. They don't leave. His words were simple, but they hit me like a punch to the chest. Not the way you think. I took a step back, my heart racing. What do you mean? What happens to them? He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper, so low I could barely hear him over the pounding of my own pulse. They become part of the town, not just in spirit but in flesh. They're always here, watching, waiting. Suddenly, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I spun around. The man from the highway, the one with the hollow eyes, was standing right behind me. His breath was warm on my neck, and his presence made my skin crawl. "You've been marked," he said. "You can't leave now. You're one of us." I tried to scream, to run, but it was like the ground had turned to quicksand beneath my feet. The diner, the town. It all seemed to close in on me, the walls tightening like a vice around my chest. Before I could react, the lights flickered. The room spun, and suddenly the man was gone. I was alone again, but the air felt heavy, suffocating, like the town itself was alive. I stumbled back to my car, my mind racing, my body shaking with a terror I couldn't control. I knew now they were right. I didn't belong in Coal Ridge, and yet somehow the town had already claimed me. I didn't sleep that night, couldn't. The vision of those hollow eyes, the whisper of the man's voice, and the unsettling feeling of being marked haunted every inch of my mind. I thought about leaving again, running far away from Coal Ridge, but deep down, I knew it was no use. The man had said it himself, "You can't leave." I didn't want to believe it. How could I? People don't just vanish into thin air. And yet, every moment I spent in that cursed town felt like a piece of me was being drained away. I tried to shake it off, I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. But as I looked in the rearview mirror, something caught my eye. My neck. There was something there, just beneath my shirt. A mark. It was faint at first, almost like a bruise, but as I stared at it, it began to grow. I pulled the car over and scrambled to look at it in the mirror. It wasn't a bruise. It wasn't even a scar. It was something new, a jagged symbol, almost like a brand, etched into my skin. Panic surged through me. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't real. I'd gone to the diner to ask questions, to find answers, and now I had this mark, like some sort of curse placed on me. Part of the town. The man's words echoed in my mind. I pulled away, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I had to leave, I had to escape. But the road, the highway, felt different. Felt like a trap. Like no matter how far I drove, the town would always be just a step behind me. It was suffocating, closing in, pulling me back with every mile. The mark on my neck burned, as if it were alive. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get out of that car, had to get away from the road. I pulled into a small parking lot near the edge of the town, my heart racing. I had no destination in mind. I just needed to breathe, to think. But the moment I stepped out of the car, I felt the change. The air had grown colder, thicker. I was being watched. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help myself. There, standing across the lot, was the woman from the diner. Her pale eyes locked onto mine, and a small smile crept onto her lips. "You shouldn't have come back," she whispered. Her voice carried on the wind like a ghost sigh. Before I could respond, I heard it. The sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, behind me. I turned around. The man from the diner, the one with the eyes that had haunted me for weeks, was walking toward me. His steps measured and unwavering. His dark figure loomed in the fog, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. He didn't need to speak. His presence was enough. "You've been marked," he said, his voice low, almost mechanical. "You'll never leave now. Not alive." Suddenly, the world seemed to close in around me. The parking lot, once so empty, was now filled with figures emerging from the darkness. The same hollow eyes, the same dead expressions. The people of Coal Ridge. They were all there, and they weren't just standing in the shadows anymore. They were circling me, closing in, surrounding me. The man stepped forward, his face inches from mine. "You're one of us now," he said, his voice colder than the wind that whipped through the lot. "You don't get to leave once you've been marked. You belong here." I backed away, my body shaking, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My mind screamed at me to run, to escape, but my legs wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, like I was part of the town itself, like I had been swallowed whole by Coal Ridge. They moved in closer, their faces now twisted in that same hollow expression. I could hear their whispers in the distance, an unholy murmur of voices that seemed to rise and fall like the wind. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, just when the weight of it all crushed me like an unseen hand, there was a sudden, deafening bang. The figures stopped. Their eyes darted to the sound, their heads turning in unison. It was then that I saw him. The man from the diner, the one who had told me I couldn't leave, was standing still, his body rigid, his face expressionless. In his hand, a revolver. I didn't understand. Why would he help me? But before I could say anything, he turned the gun on himself. His finger squeezed the trigger. Bang. The world fell silent. The shot rang out, loud and final. My heart froze in my chest as I watched the man crumble to the ground, his body twitching for a second before going still. The hollow-eyed figures around me didn't move. They didn't flinch. They didn't react to the death of one of their own. They just stood there. For a moment, I thought I had imagined the whole thing, that maybe I was losing my mind, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. But the body lying on the ground in front of me was real. His blood seeped into the cracked pavement, dark and thick, like ink spilling across a page. And then one of the figures stepped forward. It was the woman from the diner, her pale eyes glowing faintly in the fog. "You don't understand, do you?" she whispered, her voice like ice. "He didn't want to be part of Coal Ridge anymore. But you don't have that choice. Not anymore." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had been hoping, praying, that there was a way out, that if I just left, just escaped, I could get away from the horror that was Coal Ridge. But this felt like an inescapable web, a trap I had walked into and couldn't get out of. As I looked at the body of the man, I realized the truth. He hadn't been trying to save me. He hadn't been trying to help me escape. No, he had taken his life because the only way to get away from Coal Ridge was in death. There was no other option. Once the town marked you, you were part of it forever, alive or dead. And that's when I understood the real horror of Coal Ridge. I turned to run, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. It was as if the ground had grown heavier, pulling me down, refusing to let me leave. The figures started closing in again, their eyes fixed on me. There was no more fear in them, no more uncertainty, just a cold, empty presence, like the town itself had claimed their souls. Then I heard a voice. It wasn't the woman's or any of the others. This voice was different, strong, deep, commanding. "Enough!" The figures froze. Even the woman stepped back, her eyes wide with something I couldn't place. The voice had come from a shadow, one that had been looming just at the edge of the parking lot. A figure emerged. He was taller than the others, his face obscured by a long, dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat. His presence was far more terrifying than anything I'd seen before. The very air around him seemed to ripple, as though reality itself was bending to his will. "You've been marked by the town," he said, his voice calm but cold. "And now you are bound to it." I wanted to scream, to run, but my body betrayed me. My throat was dry, my legs frozen in place, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. "Coal Ridge doesn't let go of what it claims," the figure continued. "But you can still make a choice." "Choice?" I rasped, my voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean?" The figure stepped closer, his shadow falling over me like a blanket. "You can become part of this town. Join us, live with us. Your life will be long, and the town will give you power, purpose. It will give you eternity." I shuddered at the thought. Eternity. The same eternity the people in this town had suffered. Their souls trapped in this hell, their bodies bound to the town as it slowly consumed them. "And if I refuse?" I asked, my voice trembling, though a part of me already knew the answer. The figure smiled. It was cold, cruel. "Then you become like him." He pointed to the body of the man on the ground. I didn't need to ask what he meant. The dead man was the only one who had tried to escape the town, tried to escape the curse of Coal Ridge. And now he was gone. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. The choice I had was clear, though it was the most terrifying thing I could imagine. I could join them. I could accept the mark and become like the others, trapped in Coal Ridge forever, or I could refuse and die, my body left behind to rot, my soul trapped in the endless cycle of darkness. But then a thought struck me. If I joined them, would I ever truly be alive again? Would I ever remember what it felt like to be human? Or would I just become another empty shell, another hollow-eyed figure in this cursed town? I couldn't make the decision. Not yet. So I ran. The figure didn't stop me. He didn't even move as I sprinted toward my car. I didn't know where I was going anymore, but I couldn't stay in that town. Couldn't let them win. As I drove away, I didn't look back. I don't know if I'll make it out alive. I don't know if I've already been marked, if I'm already part of Coal Ridge. But I do know one thing, it's never over. Not for me. Not for anyone. And if you ever find yourself passing through a small town like Coal Ridge, if you see a sign that says "Welcome to Coal Ridge," don't stop. Don't even think about it. Because once you do, you'll never leave. I didn't know how long I had been driving. Time had lost all meaning the moment I left Coal Ridge behind. It felt as though the road stretched on forever, a never-ending abyss beneath the dim headlights of my car. The fog rolled in thick and heavy, making everything feel distant, unreal. I thought I had escaped. I thought the town had no power over me anymore. But even now, miles away from the cursed town, I could feel its presence creeping at the edges of my mind. It wasn't just the mark on my neck that still burned beneath my skin. It was the feeling that something was with me, watching me, always watching. I had made my choice. I'd run. But I didn't know if that choice would be enough to keep me safe. The figure's words haunted me. "You can become part of the town. Live with us. Join us. Or you'll become like him." The road twisted and turned ahead, and I could swear I saw headlights behind me, keeping pace. I dared not glance in the rearview mirror. I knew what I would see. The town had followed me. It wasn't just in my mind anymore. It was real. Those hollow-eyed figures, the dead man in the parking lot, they were all with me, inescapable. I could feel their eyes burning into my back, their whispers crawling under my skin. I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands shaking violently. My heart pounded in my chest, as if my very life was being squeezed from me. I didn't know what to do. How could I outrun something like that? How could I fight it? But then something happened. A sudden calm washed over me. I realized, in that moment of stillness, that maybe I hadn't really escaped at all. The mark on my neck began to burn hotter. It was like it was alive, growing, spreading beneath my skin. I could feel it moving, twisting with a mind of its own, as if it were rooting itself deeper into my flesh. Couldn't stop it. Couldn't ignore it. The town had claimed me. No matter how far I ran, I would never be free. And then, the truth hit me. It wasn't just the town that had marked me. It was something older, something darker. Coal Ridge wasn't just a place, it was alive. It had existed for centuries, feeding on the souls of anyone who wandered into its grasp. It had been waiting for me. I didn't want to accept it, but I had no choice. I heard the crunch of tires behind me. Slowly, I turned my head to look in the rearview mirror. The man with the hollow eyes stood there. He was standing on the road, like he had always been there. His face twisted into the same chilling smile he had given me in the parking lot. And with him, the rest of the town's shadows gathered. The woman from the diner, the people who had vanished before me, they were all there. They were all watching. "You can't outrun us," the man said, his voice barely a whisper over the wind. "You've made your choice. There is no escape. There is no life beyond Coal Ridge." I wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come. I was paralyzed, unable to move or speak. The mark burned hotter, and I realized that the longer I fought it, the more it would consume me. It had already begun. The town had already won. As I sat there in my car, surrounded by the shadowy figures of Coal Ridge, I understood. There was no running, no surviving. The town was an unyielding force, a parasite that would never let go once it had you. It didn't care how far you ran. It didn't care if you lived or died. It would claim your soul, forever. The last thing I remember before everything went dark was the woman's voice, soft and cold in my ear. "Welcome home."